The map of the Middle East has just been rewritten, not by a treaty or a ballot, but by the cold, calculated application of superior naval tonnage. For 44 years, the Islamic Republic of Iran held the world hostage with a single geographic reality, the 21-mile wide throat of the Strait of Hormuz. That era ended this morning. As the United States Navy shifts from mere presence to a brutal, systematic lockdown, the primary pillar of Iranian strategic deterrence has effectively collapsed into the sea. Geopolitics, in its purest and most honest form, is the study of how power interacts with the physical world. It is a discipline that ignores the hopeful rhetoric of diplomats and focuses instead on the unforgiving math of geography and the logistics of kinetic force. To understand the gravity of the current naval lockdown in the Strait of Hormuz, we must first strip away the political noise and look at the blue water through the lens of hard realism. For decades, the international community treated the strait as an untouchable choke point, a place where the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, could threaten 20% of the world's petroleum supply with a mix of asymmetrical swarming tactics and land-based anti-ship missiles. Tehran believed that the cost of clearing the strait would be so high and the global economic shock so devastating that the United States would never dare to test the threshold of a total blockade. This belief was the cornerstone of Iranian national security. It was their geographic veto over Western foreign policy. They were wrong. The current posture of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, bolstered by a massive surge of Aegis-equipped destroyers, nuclear-powered attack submarines, and an unprecedented array of unmanned surveillance assets, represents far more than a temporary patrol or a show of force. It is a fundamental seizure of the gate by establishing a total, persistent sensor-to-shooter net over these narrow waters. Washington has essentially informed Tehran that their geographic leverage has been voided. This is a direct kinetic assault on Iran's A2AD, or anti-access area denial capability. In the world of great power competition, when you lose the ability to deny your enemy access to your own front door, you've already lost the strategic high ground. The lockdown is not a prelude to war. It is the realization of a new, crushing reality where Iran no longer controls its most vital strategic asset. The geography of the Strait of Hormuz is a nightmare for traditional naval planners. And that is precisely why Iran invested billions into its coastal defense infrastructure. The shipping lanes are narrow, the waters are shallow, and the proximity to the Iranian coastline puts every billion-dollar destroyer within range of shore-based batteries and mobile missile launchers hidden in the jagged cliffs of the Musandam Peninsula. However, the U.S. military has spent the last decade quietly and methodically perfecting the art of distributed maritime operations. They are no longer sailing large, vulnerable targets into the mouth of the lion as they did during the tanker wars of the 1980s. Instead, they have turned the strait into a multi-domain kill web. High-altitude, long-endurance drones, underwater autonomous vehicles, and satellite-linked sensor arrays now provide a persistent, unblinking eye over every square inch of the Iranian coast. The brutal lockdown we are witnessing today is the hardware-heavy realization of this technological overmatch. Every Iranian fast attack craft that leaves its pier in Bandar Abbas is tracked in real time by artificial intelligence. Every missile canister that is rotated toward the sea is categorized, geolocated, and targeted by standoff assets from hundreds of miles away. The power dynamic has shifted from a game of hide and seek to a state of absolute strategic transparency. In the cold logic of realism, transparency for one side is a death sentence for the other. Iran's ability to use the element of surprise, the very heart of their naval doctrine, has been neutralized by a digital iron curtain. At the core of this confrontation lies the concept of strategic depth, or more accurately, Iran's lack of it. Their economy is essentially a monocrop system, utterly dependent on the very waters they have long threatened to close. By executing a lockdown, the United States is testing the endurance of the Iranian state against the endurance of the global supply chain. But the variables have changed. With the United States now a net exporter of energy and the strategic petroleum reserves of the Gulf Cooperation Council nations at record highs, the leverage has flipped. Washington can afford to wait. Tehran cannot. Every day the lockdown persists. The Iranian treasury bleeds out. Every hour their tankers sit idle at the Karg Island terminal. The internal stability of the regime fractures further. This is not a war of attrition in the traditional sense. It is a war of suffocating constraints. The U.S. is not just blocking ships, they are blocking the oxygen of the Islamic Republic. By controlling the choke point, the U.S. has effectively placed a noose around the neck of the Iranian economy and is slowly, methodically tightening the slack. There are no speeches required when the tankers stop moving. The silence of the Strait is the loudest message Washington could ever send. To appreciate the scale of this shift, one must look at the specific deployment of force. We see the integration of Task Force 59, the U.S., Navy's dedicated unmanned systems unit working in tandem with traditional carrier strike groups. This isn't just a collection of ships. It's a sentient mesh of sensors and shooters. The U.S. has deployed Sea Hunter autonomous vessels to patrol the shallowest parts of the Strait, where Iranian midget submarines once operated with impunity. Above them, MQ-4C Triton drones provide a continuous, high-resolution feed of the entire Persian Gulf. This level of surveillance makes the Iranian swarm tactic, sending dozens of fast boats to overwhelm a single ship, tactically obsolete. Before those boats can even clear the harbor, they are already programmed into the fire control computers of offshore platforms. The brutal nature of this lockdown refers to its efficiency. It is the application of industrial-scale violence to a localized geographic problem. The U.S. has effectively extended its border to the high water mark of the Iranian coast. For the Iranian leadership, this is a psychological catastrophe. They are witnessing the evaporation of their primary means of deterrence, and with it, their ability to dictate terms to the international community. The illusion of Iranian maritime sovereignty has vanished, replaced by the crushing weight of a superior kill chain that leaves no room for asymmetrical error. We are no longer asking if a conflict might break out. We are observing a deliberate process of strategic castration where the hunter has become the hunted. The question now is not about intent, but about the cold logic of who owns the horizon and who is merely a prisoner within it. The second phase of this lockdown reveals the true lethal nature of the escalation ladder. In the doctrine of great power realism, an escalation is only an effective tool of statecraft if you can credibly dominate the next rung of the ladder. Iran's traditional response to naval pressure has been a menu of asymmetrical provocations, harassing commercial shipping, deploying naval mines, or using proxy forces to strike at regional infrastructure. But the U.S. response this time is fundamentally different. They are not waiting for the provocation to occur. They have moved into a preemptive posture of total dominance by integrating the naval forces of the United Kingdom, France, and regional heavyweights like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates under a single unified maritime command. The U.S. has created a wall of steel that Iran cannot bypass without triggering a multilateral response. This isn't just a U.S. Navy operation anymore. It is the collective security architecture of the Western world, reasserting that the global commons are no longer subject to an Iranian veto. Each time an Iranian commander in the IRGC Navy considers a strike, he must weigh his few dozen coastal missiles against the combined weight of multiple carrier strike groups and hundreds of land-based strike fighters stationed throughout the region. The math simply does not work for Tehran. This is the definition of overwhelming force applied to a specific geographic coordinate. What we are witnessing is the definitive breakdown of the gray zone strategy. For years, Iran operated in the shadows, using deniable attacks and proxy forces to push the boundaries of what the West would tolerate. They played a game of salami slicing tactics, taking small bites out of international norms without ever triggering a full-scale war. The U.S. lockdown has brought this conflict out of the shadows and into the harsh, uncompromising light of conventional military reality. By declaring a maritime security zone that encompasses the entire strait and its approaches, Washington has erased the ambiguity that Tehran once exploited. Any movement within this zone that does not comply with U.S. directives is now treated as a hostile act. This forces the Iranian leadership into a brutal binary choice: comply and admit their loss of control to their own people, or resist and face total kinetic destruction. There is no middle ground, no room for the subtle subversion or the plausible deniability that the IRGC excels at. This is the hard and hard realism. It is the systematic removal of options when an opponent has only two choices and both lead to a catastrophic strategic defeat. The battle is effectively over before the first shot is fired. The logistical footprint of this operation is equally staggering and deserves close analysis. The U.S. has established a floating base of operations, utilizing expeditionary sea bases like the USS Lewis B. Puller, which allows for indefinite station keeping without the need for constant port calls. They aren't going home. They have solved the problem of the tyranny of distance by repurposing regional bases into a massive interconnected hub that ensures a constant rotation of fresh crews, munitions, and fuel. This is a level of logistical endurance that Iran cannot hope to match. While the IRGC is forced to scrounge for spare parts and fuel under the weight of crippling sanctions, the U.S. Navy is operating on a global supply chain that is essentially inexhaustible. This disparity in strategic depth and logistical reach is what makes the lockdown truly brutal. It is not just about who has the better missiles. It is about who can keep those missiles on target for months or even years without blinking. The U.S. is signaling that it is prepared to occupy the throat of the Persian Gulf for as long as it takes to break the Iranian will. The psychological impact of this lockdown on the Iranian leadership cannot be overstated. Their entire defensive posture for the last 4 decades, their entire identity as a regional power, was built on the Hormuz option. It was their version of a nuclear weapon without the radiation, the ability to destroy the global economy at a moment's notice. Now that this option has been shown to be hollow, the internal power dynamics within the Iranian government and the IRGC are likely in a state of chaotic realignment. Hard realism dictates that when a state's primary means of security is invalidated, that state must either undergo a radical transformation or risk a catastrophic collapse of its authority. The U.S. is betting on the latter. By holding the Strait, they are signaling to the Iranian people and the various factions within the regime that the Islamic Republic is powerless to protect its most vital interest. This is how you win a war without a land invasion. You don't occupy the capital. You occupy the artery that feeds the capital. You make the regime's survival contingent on your permission. The lockdown is a physical, kinetic manifestation of a new regional order where the U.S. no longer manages the Iranian threat, but actively contains it within a cage of iron and silicon. Every carrier that sails through the Strait, every drone that circles Bandar Abbas is a reminder that the old rules are dead. Furthermore, we must look at the Samson option. In the past, analysts argued that if Iran were truly backed into a corner, they would attempt to take the world down with them by mining the Strait and attacking Saudi oil facilities. But the lockdown has effectively neutralized this threat as well. The U.S. has deployed advanced mine countermeasure ships and unmanned underwater vehicles that can detect and neutralize mines faster than Iran can lay them. At the same time, The integration of Patriot and THAAD missile defense batteries across the GCC has created a multi-layered shield that can intercept Iranian ballistic missiles before they reach their targets. The Samson option only works if the enemy is unprepared. The U.S. is more than prepared. They are proactive. They have turned the entire region into a fortress. For Iran, the realization that they can no longer even lose destructively is perhaps the most demoralizing blow of all. They are trapped in a cage of their own making, watching as their influence evaporates in real time. As the gears of the American war machine lock into place, the window for an Iranian face-saving exit is slamming shut, leaving Tehran with a choice between humiliating submission or a suicidal charge against a wall of Aegis missiles. The regional balance has tilted so far toward Washington that the very concept of Iranian deterrence has been relegated to the history books. We are entering the end game of a 40-year standoff where the final move is being played out in the deep channels of the world's most dangerous waterway. The long-term consequences of this lockdown will ripple far beyond the shores of the Persian Gulf, impacting the global calculus of every major power on the planet. By proving that the Strait of Hormuz can be effectively seized, held, and managed as a private American lake, the United States has sent a chilling message to other revisionist powers, most notably China and Russia. The message is simple and devastating. Choke points are only leverage as long as the United States allows them to be. For China, which relies on the oil road through the Indian Ocean and the Strait of Malacca for the vast majority of its energy needs, the sight of the U.S. Navy belling the Iranian cat is a strategic nightmare. It demonstrates that despite the rise of near-peer competitors, the U.S. still possesses the industrial, technological, and logistical capacity to close the global spigot at a moment's notice. This reestablishes the United States as the undisputed hegemon of the seas at a time when that title was being vocally questioned in Beijing and Moscow. The geopolitical center of gravity has shifted back to the West. The Middle East, once seen as a region from which the U.S. was pivoting away, has been reaffirmed as a theater of absolute American priority. But this time, it is not about nation building or spreading democracy. It is about the cold, hard control of the global energy flow. It is about the raw exercise of power to maintain a world order that favors Washington's interests. In the regional context, the lockdown has fundamentally altered the calculus of the Arab states. For years, nations like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait lived in the shadow of Iranian intimidation. They were forced to hedge their bets, maintaining diplomatic back channels with Tehran and occasionally distancing themselves from Washington, afraid of being caught in the crossfire of a closed strait. They watched as Iran's axis of resistance expanded across Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, feeling the noose tighten. Now, they see a United States that is willing to exert brutal control to ensure the flow of commerce and protect its allies. This will accelerate the integration of a regional security architecture that explicitly excludes Iran. We are looking at a future where the Abraham Accords are no longer just diplomatic agreements or trade pacts, but a hard military reality backed by American naval steel. The regional powers now see that the U.S. is the only force capable of guaranteeing their survival against a predatory Tehran. This realization will lead to deeper intelligence sharing, joint military exercises, and a unified front that leaves Iran more isolated than at any point since the 1979 revolution. The axis of resistance, that sprawling network of proxies from Baghdad to Damascus to Beirut, suddenly finds its patron in Tehran, isolated and unable to project power beyond its own beaches. The logistical umbilical cord that feeds groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis is now under the permanent shadow of a U.S. Navy that has shown it will no longer tolerate disruptions to the maritime order. Without the credible threat of closing Hormuz, Iran's ability to protect its forward defense assets is severely diminished. If Iran cannot even control the water 10 miles from its own coast, how can it hope to protect a militia in the Levant? The ripple effect of this lockdown will be felt in every proxy conflict across the region. It is a slow motion collapse of the Iranian imperial project. The IRGC, which once bragged about controlling 4 Arab capitals, now finds itself struggling to control its own territorial waters. This is the brutal reality of power. It is finite, and it is being reclaimed by the hegemon. Looking further ahead, we must consider the impact on the global energy market. The lockdown of Hormuz, paradoxically, might lead to a more stable energy price in the long run. By removing the Iranian risk premium from the price of a barrel of oil, the constant fear that a sudden skirmish in the Strait will send prices to $200, the U.S. is providing a massive subsidy to the global economy. When the U.S. Navy owns the Strait, the unpredictability is gone. The market hates uncertainty, and the lockdown provides the ultimate certainty. The oil will flow because the U.S. Navy says it will. This is the Pax Americana applied to the energy sector. It reinforces the dollar's role as the global reserve currency and ensures that the transition to green energy happens on a timeline dictated by Washington, not by a disruptive regime in Tehran. Ultimately, the U.S. naval lockdown of the Strait of Hormuz is the final nail in the coffin of the post-Cold War era of globalization. We have returned to an age of spheres of influence and hard power blocks. The Strait is no longer a neutral international waterway. It is a contested zone where the strongest power has asserted its absolute will. For Iran, the path forward is bleak and narrow. If they attempt to break the lockdown, they face a conventional defeat that would likely trigger a domestic uprising and the end of the clerical regime. If they accept the lockdown, they accept a status as a second-tier power, contained, neutered, and irrelevant on the global stage. There are no good options for a state that tries to fight geography and loses. The map has been redrawn, the choke point has been cleared, and the new order in the Middle East is being written in the wake of the Fifth Fleet. The world is watching, but for the leaders in Tehran, the view is only of a closing horizon and the cold, gray hulls of the ships that now own their destiny. This is the reality of great power competition. Might does not always make right, but in the unforgiving world of geopolitics, it certainly makes the rules. And in the Strait of Hormuz, the United States has just become the ultimate rule maker. The age of Iranian leverage is over. The age of the lockdown has begun,